Good evening. Commodore Jane Sawyer asked me to put together a slideshow commemorating Kaneohe Yacht Club's first 100 years. So that's what you're going to see tonight. Bill Leary, I've been an active member here at Kaneohe Yacht Club for the past 64 years. I grew up here at the club from the age of 6. I learned to sail here. I met my wife here. In fact, I met both my wives here. My oldest daughter met her husband here, and they're members, and they are raising their daughter here as well. My youngest daughter is also a member, and I race with her on Thursday nights. The Commodore put out a request for pictures for this presentation earlier this year, so I've used some of those to go into the slideshow. Lori and I also spent about 15 hours going through the Yacht Club's albums and got a lot of the material that you'll see tonight out of those albums as well. And finally, some of my own photos from the last 60 years are part of the slideshow. These shows are always more fun when they're interactive, so if you have any questions, comments, or corrections, please feel free to jump in at any time. So to get started here, this first slide, this is what our club currently looks like today. Greg Gillette, George Losey, and I were trying to figure out where the old club was located. There's no sign of it left anymore on that far side of the bay. It was over by King Intermediate School to the west of Coconut Island. But I was digging through some online archives, and I found this picture in the UH archive. You see Coconut Island here on the right, and here's Lillipuna Point on the left, and here's the old yacht club pier right there. So this shot was taken in about 1959 or 58. The pier was still there even though the club had moved over here. But you can see that, so the prevailing wind is from the east, and the club is here on the shores of what is now Aliti Shores subdivision. And it was all mud flats out in front of the club. So you had to, and it was a small club. It was primarily a centerboard sailboat club because of the mud flats. So you'd launch your boats, walk them out over the mud flats to the end of the T pier here, and then once you got your sails up and got out here in the deep water, centerboards and rudders would go down, and you'd have to short tack out this little fjord between the reefs out into open water. Certainly not an ideal location for a yacht club. Here's some shots from the old club. This is a shot from the clubhouse looking out at the pier. The tide is in here over the mud flats, and boats are getting ready to go out for sailing for the day. Now, on this particular day, the wind is out of the south, an unusual direction, so they were able to reach in and out of that channel, but that, like I said, unusual direction. Here's another shot of the old clubhouse. You can see here the tide is out, mud flats out in front of the club.
Deep enough to where most of the boats were moored out halfway out the pier, up towards the end of the T pier there. They were all unmoored. The railway was used just for working on the boats.
Okay, so
generally the boats were floating in the water. It didn't have to be launched on a race day.
Right. So Greg Gillette's comment was that boats were mostly moored out over the mud flats and not over in the deep water, so you didn't have to launch them each race day. I got another shot here I'll show you. This is the work dock, and this little inclined ramp here was how they launched the boats. It would have been pretty much impossible to launch all the boats on race day down that little ramp. So they bring them up here to work on them. Is that correct, Greg? Yeah, they work on them up here and then launch them there, and they all got stored out over in the mud flats. Here's one of the MP class boats, Mid-Pacific, which was a class of boat that we only had here at the club, to my knowledge. Plywood, homemade boats, and there's the pier out in the background working on the boat there on the launch side. Here's some boats tied up at the end of the T head, getting ready to head out for race day or coming in, can't really tell. This is an MP in the foreground, a Lightning in the background, looks like another MP, and some fishing boats moored a little farther off there. course, they had work parties back then, just like we do now. Here's a work party, looks like replacing planks out on the pier. And an MP and a Lightning getting ready to head out for a day's racing. It's Lillipuna Point there in the background. I stuck this shot in because it shows the Seth Parker, which was a four-masted schooner that belonged to Chris Holmes, who owned Coconut Island. Coconut Island has been owned by a number of real interesting characters over the years, and Chris Holmes was the heir to the Fleshman's Yeast fortune. And he had all kinds of lavish parties, and he had a zoo out there with an elephant, and he had monkeys, all kinds of stuff. There's a book about Coconut Island called Moko Oloi. Lori's going to stand up and show that to you. If you can get your hands on it, it's a really fun read because it tells all about this storied island. Anyway, Chris Holmes owned this huge schooner. Greg, you know how long that schooner was? Remember how long Seth Parker was?
I'm guessing it was about 350 feet.
350 foot, huge.
Pulled up onto the island in the inlet there.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. Okay, you're stealing my thunder here. All I asked you was how long she was. Anyway, so they used that boat for carrying cargo and fish and all that kind of stuff. And then when she got towards the end of her life, they pulled her into a slip there on Coconut Island and cemented her in, basically permanent dry dock, to make a place to have parties, basically. Here in the late 40s and early 50s, she still had her mast. But when I was a little kid, by that time the mast had fallen off and the hull was left. And then by the late 60s, the termites had gotten to it. And by early 70s, there was nothing left. And you can't even see any sign of her today. So here's another shot of the Seth Parker, just to give you a feel for how big she was. Yeah, big boat, big boat. This is Jens Schultz, and on his MP, Jens Schultz, club member, grandfather of Brian Rush. Some of you might remember Brian, who was a member here for many years, and he moved to Texas. Anyway, this is Jens's MP sailing off the old club. And this is
Is that Ma Schultz's husband?
You're stealing my thunder. But that is correct.
To be interactive.
Yes.
Use the mic.
Thank you, Rick. Rick asked if this was is that Ma Schultz's husband, and that's why I put this photo in here, because this is Jens and Ma Schultz here at the old pier. Jens Schultz was a German national. He was in one of the internment camps here in Honolulu during World War II, Sand Island internment camp during World War II. After the war, of course, he got let out and went back to sailing as MP. And this is his wife. I don't know her first name, but she was always referred to as Ma Schultz. And when the new club was built, the area between the bar and the men's room, the wind blows down through there. It's nice and cool. And Ma Schultz used to sit there and wait for her husband while he was out racing. She was such a fixture there that it became known as the Ma Schultz Lounge, and it's still known as that by that name today.
Pier still looks the same.
Yeah. This is a magazine article from the mid or early 1950s, I think 1954, and it talks about the new Kaneohe Yacht Club that was planned. It discusses the fact that the club needed to raise about $60,000 to put in the infrastructure here at the club, and they got the lease for the land for really cheap from Kaneohe Ranch because the ranch was trying to sell the properties up and down the bay here without a lot of success because there were no tunnels over from town. It was hard to get to. In fact, my dad got 1 acre on the water back here for just paying the back taxes. That's all they had to do to get the property here on the bay. But the club, Kaneohe Ranch, thought would provide a magnet for the people purchasing the properties around here, and they were right. But we got a good deal on the club. But we had to build the infrastructure. So one of the ways they got the money to build the club was to offer life memberships for $600. And that's why we have life memberships at Kaneohe Yacht Club, was to get that initial seed money to build the club. I thought this article was interesting because it has a couple of ads in here for people you might remember. George Durham was a club member, and Bud Thompson, who sold insurance. Here was an ad for Bud as well. Here's another aerial shot I found from 1947 of where the club was eventually built, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see a little better. Here's the coral patch out in front of the club, and where the mooring area is out there. This is the inlet where the club was eventually built. Now, you can see there's a channel going in there already. That channel was a private channel that was built back there before 1947, and that goes into the property that currently belongs to Doug and Margaret Peebles. So you can see this berm out here by the channel. What they would do is they'd take an excavator and walk it out and dig out the soil, pile it up on the reef, and that would be the platform for the excavator to continue walking out and building the channel. And that's why all these channels here have berms, because the excavator would walk out there to build them. Marina, are you going to come give a presentation with me? Anyway, the club property. That's a relative right there. Yeah. So, anyway, this is the club property, just north of the area where this old channel is located. Okay, so now we've leased the property, and we're starting to clear and grub. And here's the initial clearing and grubbing of the property. You see mangroves here and all kinds of weeds and stuff. This is the first bit of construction. Harbor was dredged. You can see the bulkhead here, the launch ramp, and they've finished grading the property. A view from up by the North Hoist looking south, you can see this has all been graded, and here's the raised area where the pool and clubhouse are located. The first structure that went in was a North Hoist, and it didn't take long for the starboats to show up. Of course, they couldn't sail them. Did you have starboats at the old club, Greg? At all? No, yeah, because you couldn't get them in and out. So finally, at the new club, it's deep enough to launch starboats, so the starboat fleet gets started here. I think this is the first buildings that were built at the club. Here's the looking west. Here's the men's and women's restroom and the bar. You know, these sailors, we have to be able to launch our boats. We have to be able to have a drink, and we have to be able to recycle our drinks somewhere. So that's the first thing they built. And here's the invitation to the club opening, December 17th, 1955. Here we are now, May 1956. We're starting to get some paving there by the North Hoist for dry storage, and looks like Lightning is getting ready to head out for a day of racing. You can see, I think the pool must be installed in this picture, because here's the pool house. So they wouldn't have put that in if they didn't have the pool in by that time. And here's looking out E-Pier. So when they first dredged the harbor here, they didn't dredge it all the way. They only dredged it halfway out of what is the existing E-Pier. And you can see this berm over here. So they hadn't completely dredged the harbor, and they only built half of E-Pier. This is about 1956. Okay, now we're in 1958. You can see we're starting to fill up dry storage with boats. Mostly sailboats, but we're getting some motorboats in here as well. El Toro out racing in the harbor. Here's that berm. You can see the berm in the background. And now we've got a new fleet at the club. 1959 thistles. So we've got a pretty big thistle fleet growing here at the yacht club. Notice there's no floating pier here yet. That came later. Here's a close look at the pool and bathroom and bar area. Just before 1960. Okay, here's an aerial shot of the club in 1960. I'll zoom in so you can see a little better, and you can see we only have half of Ypres here, and here's that berm I was talking about earlier. We haven't completely dredged the harbor yet. That old channel that I showed you that was there originally, that's over right there. Came right in where I'm panning over the photo there. So when they dredged our harbor, they dredged right up to that channel. And now it's later in the year, 1960, and here they finished dredging the harbor and completed Ypres. Looks like they've also completed the longhouse. In this picture, it looks like it's more than the bar now. It looks like the complete longhouse. I don't see any tennis court yet. I'm not sure when that was built. This picture was taken in about 1962. I know taken about 1962. I know it wasn't before that because that was the year my father bought Tongaroa, and this is Tongaroa. Some of you might remember her. She was here at the club until just a couple years ago when her last owner, Eric Johnson, shipped her back to her home port in Auckland, New Zealand to be a museum boat. But my dad bought her in 1962, and back then, when you got a boat, you just brought it over to Kaneohe Yacht Club and you got a slip right away. You can see a bunch of empty slips. No problem back in those days. I'm pretty sure this photo actually came off a postcard. I'm pretty sure this photo was taken on a Saturday because that was the day we always had El Toro races here in the basin. I never missed a Saturday El Toro race. You see them sailing around here, and this would be the committee boat. You can see here in 1962, the clubhouse is in, the galley is in. Looks like we're completely paved now. Lots of coconut trees. Nothing across the street from the yacht club, though. That was all cow pasture back in those days. Here's our 1962 fleet captains: Vic Kuhn, MP Fleet, Bobby Edmondson, El Toro Fleet, Glenn Clark. Back here, the Thistle Fleet. Ed Williams, he was our race committee chairman. Don Chapman on the Star Fleet. Don was also the architect of our club improvements here. I believe it was one of his first jobs out of architecture school to design the club. But he designed the club. Bob Krebs, the 110 Fleet, and Al Hyde, Lightning Fleet. 1962, this photo. This is 1963. I believe this was a Transpac party. Harry Euler, Master of Ceremonies, he was a real character down here. He has King Neptune next to him, and I think these are the deckhands decked out as mermaids. This is my mother here. And I'm not sure what this is, but there's the Jolly Good Fellows, a bunch of club stalwarts. Here's in the front row, Tom Mountain, Paul Joy, Jim Wakefield, Charlie Dole, of course. We all remember Charlie Dole. Dick Mahan, Al Hyde. Here's Glenn Clark and Harry Euler. And then in the back row, we've got Grant Morris, Dick McFarland, George Hurd. Was George related to Bob Hurd? Father, okay. Well, I wasn't sure. Tom Carpenter, who's still a member of the club, although he doesn't come down much anymore. George Crabb, didn't know him. Train Dayblock. Here's Al Phillips, Aaron and Brett's father, back here. Bill Klopp, Pat Cavaco, Herb Jordan, George Soper, and Ian Harrington here on the right. Okay. Jane's comment was she thinks this is they used to have the Star Bulletin Championships back in the day. I remember those. It was I think it was before the state championship regattas. It was kind of a state championship regatta. Looks like Tom Carpenter won that year. Thistle's out racing on the bay now. You can see a star here, and this is called a kite, which is a trainer for the Olympic fin class boat. We're starting to get an ORF fleet here at Kaneohe in the mid-60s. This is Norm Yett's Ole, a Erickson 30, and this was the boat that I cut my teeth on ocean racing. I used to sail with Norm. We'd sail around the island and do little Heiner races and all that kind of stuff. It was great fun. Great way to learn. This is Kaneohe's Stinger, also an Erickson 30 club boat. And Cy Gillette's Melly McConney. This is 10-year-old Noodle there standing in the hatch. This was a photo shoot. We went out on Bud Thompson took this picture, and this picture was on the cover of the '65 Transpac race brochure. The boats now in the mid to late '60s now, we're starting to get rid of the wooden boats. They're all disappearing. We're all getting fiberglass boats with aluminum masts now are starting to come into vogue. We still have some wooden boats like the plywood Thunderbirds, which was a homemade plywood keel boat, but we're starting to get Ranger 26s and Cal 230s. I think this is an Erickson 29, and of course a Sunfish here.
That's Jeannie. That's Jeannie Simeone.
Jeannie Simeone in 1965? Okay. Maybe I got the date wrong here. Date's wrong, okay. Thistle Out Racing on the Bay. Yeah, a lot of these photos came from the albums, and if they were stuck in the wrong year album, then I got the year wrong. But that's the way that goes. Thistle Fleet at the beginning of or end of the day. And now the pier is starting to fill up with boats. I believe this is opening day, 1966, or thereabouts. Maybe a little earlier, I think. Yeah, there's still no floating pier, so this would have been probably 1964. We had a pretty good PCAT fleet here at the club. They were good boats then, and they're still good boats. Typical race results from the 60s. 14 boat Thistle fleet. They didn't show up for every race, but most of them did. The club back then was primarily a small boat racing club. We didn't have a whole lot of keel boats. Those started to come in the late 60s and 70s. Thistle's out racing again. Here's the Thistle fleet, front row. I can't remember his first name, but Mr. Shaw, Paul Joy, Glenn Clark, Tom Carpenter, Mel Levin, Tom Roseberry, Bobby Holland. I didn't know this guy Evans, Merritt Giles, and Hank Kaneohe, Thistle fleet. I believe this was like a vaudeville show that they put on at the Transpac party every 2 years, and it was Margaret Peebles' parents, Don Porter, and I can't remember his wife's. Is Margaret here? No, I can't remember his wife's name, but they would honcho this vaudeville show at the Transpac party every 2 years, and it really was a big production. And I think these are the deckhands up doing their thing, looking good. Thistle's coming in from a day of racing. I put this in here in 1967. You can see the dry land here at the end of E Pier. There was a berm all the way along E Pier that made up of dredged spoils that were dredged up when they did the harbor here that protected the club from storms out of the north. Eventually that berm weathered away and it's gone today. No berm. Here's Leslie Clark. Leslie Johnson to you now with her mother Dulcie in 1967. I think they must be dressed up for the fashion show. You can see here that the floating pier, at least part of it, has gone in now. And in 1965, as an 11-year-old kid, I sat on the pier here and watched Frank Rothwell. That's Mike Rothwell. You might know Mike Rothwell, Olympic silver medalist and club member. His father, Frank Rothwell, was a marine engineer and a contractor. And he contracted with KYC. He contracted with KYC to build our floating pier. So he made a pile driver, came over, drove these piles, and built the pier. But while he was driving piles out here, his pile driving rig was unstable, lifting the piles to vertical, and he got a few driven before the thing flipped over and collapsed. And it was a miracle that nobody was killed, but I remember it vividly like it was yesterday. I was sitting right on the pier. I watched the whole thing happen. As an 11-year-old kid, it was very exciting. He ended up salvaging all the gear, rebuilding a pile driving rig, this time longer and stronger, and he finished the job. So here's the pier now in 1967. Or here's the yacht club in 1967 with the first part of the floating pier installed. Looks like El Toro races out there that day. You can see the club is pretty much on the land part of the club is finished now. We got the tennis court in here. We're completely paved. Dry storage is full. Wet storage is full. You may be wondering why all the boats on the floating pier look to be identical, and it's because most of them were. In the 60s, Bob Miller started bringing in Cal 20s into the yacht club, or into Hawaii. He ended up selling 100 of them here, and we probably had about 30 of them here at the yacht club. You know, great little racing boats. They're great boats to this day, but back in those days, they were all wet sailed, kept in slips. You'll notice there's no Cal 20s up here in dry storage. Everybody wet sailed them. They went the same speed. Somewhere in the mid-70s, someone decided that Cal 20 would be faster if you dry sailed it and had a slick bottom. So once one guy does it, everybody else has to do the same thing to be competitive. So now all the Cal 20s are dry sailed. But we had a huge fleet of Cal 20s back in the day. 1967 addition to the clubhouse. That's this hollow block stuff out front here. This is a expansion of the office and area behind the bar, 1967. Another shot from 67. Looks like Hank Kaneohe broke his thistle mast while out racing, tied up here to the new floating pier. Quite a few fishing boats out here on the floating pier in those days. Or, excuse me, on the fixed pier in those days. Thistle fleet in for the day, 1967. Cal 20 up on a trailer, probably working on the bottom. This is Page Anderson pulling his thistle out of the water. Page was the father of Bruce Anderson, who grew up here at the club, and he's our recently retired head of the Department of Health, I believe. 1968, Kaneohe Yacht Club. Just a picture of what's going on down there. We used to start races from the end of E Pier, some of the longer races. We'd have kind of like the bulkhead race where we'd have a reverse handicap start, but the races all started out there. Here's Bill Thompson's Erickson 26 Drecky starting from the end of the pier. And of course the Cal 20s, because they're all wet sailed, you had to do the bottom. So here's a Cal 20 hauled out, doing the bottom there by the north hoist. Yeah, the original haul out. Thistle start at the end of the pier. Guernsey Current sailing, looks like Glenn Clark's new boat. And here's an old Thunderbird plywood boat. I used to do the varnish on this boat when I was a little kid. Another Thunderbird getting ready to start a race. And more thistles. This is Bill and Nancy Yager's thistle. He moved away to New Orleans, I believe. MPs, Lightnings. And here's Tongaroa. It's 1968. This would have been 14-year-old Noodle standing there next to the dinghy. This is probably, we used to have a race called the Channel Race twice a year. This is probably a Channel Race start because it's like a mass start of all the fleets. Lightnings, Cal 20s, Newport 20s, Thistles, MPs. There's some 110s thrown in there. Anyway, everybody out having a good time on the bay, 1969. Here's the start of the MP class, some of our class boat races with Cal 20s in the background. You win a boat race, you get tossed in the water, at least your first big boat race. This is Rick Osborne Sr., 1969, getting tossed in by his quote-unquote friends. And here was the original committee boat. I didn't remember this. Was this the same boat that they used at the old club, Greg? Do you know?
I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah, very small committee boat. This, I believe, was replaced by the Banana Patch boat a few years later. Looks like Pete Curran took tail end Charlie in the bullship. And here's young Casey Bedell, 1969, with her mom. 1969 around Oahu race. They were escorted that year by 90-foot Coast Guard cutter. I believe those were 95-foot Coast Guard cutter. And these boats on the end of the floating pier are boats doing the 3-day round Oahu race. A couple Cal 20s and a Columbia 22. So, you know, ORF, or the ocean racing fleet around Hawaii, was mostly small boats between 20 and 35 feet back in the old days. Rick Osborne and Doris Osborne, I believe this is their wedding, right, Rick?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Rick got a ready-made family. This is Shep, and help me with your sisters, Rick.
Holly.
Shep, Holly, and Heather. Club Luau, 1969, $3.75. And here's the boys coming into the luau. Charlie Dole, Jack Minton. I believe this is Ron Beers being carried in like a pua'a. Thistles racing on the bay, 1969. Yeah, Ron Beers and Charlie Dole. Tom Carpenter, Glenn Clark, Charlie Dole. These guys were the big winners of all the races there. Our first national champion was Norm Baxter, who won the Cal 20 Nationals off Waikiki in 1969. Here's Norm with his Cal 20 National Championship trophy. In 1970, the north bulkhead collapsed during a rainstorm. It was poorly engineered, so we got a surcharge of water behind the pier and it just fell over. So it had to be rebuilt properly the second time, and that's one of the reasons the club was so inexpensive. When they built it, it wasn't properly engineered. So this had to be engineered properly, and we had to go reinforce the rest of the bulkhead so this on the south side of the launch ramp, so the same thing didn't happen.
And then where that cap is now cement on the end, right?
Yeah, there's 10 feet of concrete on the top here, and there's I-beams driven down into the subsoil to act like piles to hold it down. Work parties. Tom Zoller painting the bollards out by the port crochet. Pete Curran also owned a pizza place in Kailua, and here's one of his yachtsman specials for beer and pizza. His pizza place was right where McDonald's currently is in Kailua. Lightning, we had a pretty good lightning fleet. Fran Vaughn, I think she was our first female member. She was very skilled lightning skipper, 1970 here. Fran is still a member, although I've heard she moved to the mainland, but Florida, she's still a member of the yacht club. Here's the bulkhead's been rebuilt now. They haven't finished here's a backhoe sitting there. They haven't finished backfilling yet, but we're using it anyway. Launching the fleet for a day's races. Thistles, Lightnings, 110s, Starboats, all getting ready to go, and it looks like Cal 20s as well. Here's all the boats before or after a race. Newport 20s as well as all those ones that I just mentioned. Side Gillette, one of the reasons we have the club here where it's located. Just a nice shot of the boats racing on the bay, Thistles and Cal 20s. Jerry Sinclair and Dick Holmes, a couple of stalwarts watching football in the bar. How many of you remember clamming here in the bay in about 1970? Somebody discovered that the mudflats out here were full of very tasty edible clams. And within about, this is what it looked like on any weekend day. There was a season, I can't remember when it was, but it only took about 2 years for every single clam in Kaneohe Bay to be dug up, and there's no more clams out there. So. As a kid, my dad would go to work and on the weekends, and people, the way they accessed, because there was a channel down in front of the houses, the way they'd access the mud flats out there to go clamming was right by the where the H3 is now, where it crosses over Kaneohe Bay Drive. So people would be looking for parking along Kaneohe Bay Drive. So my dad would get up and go to work, and we'd wave the cars in and park them in our front yard for $1 a piece. So as a, in 1969-70, to make 20 bucks in a day was a pretty good deal. So we never told my dad about that.
My dad did the same thing, because we grew up on Idaho Place, and that had a public right-of-way. And so the cars just stacked up and down the Bay Drive,
Right.
up and down the street.
Yeah. Ricky said he did the same thing at Inamoy, but of course people would get wet wading across to get to the mud flats there at Inamoy because of the channel there. It was a tradition there for a while to put the Commodore's boat in the pool for his first Commodore's party. But anyway, this is Ron Beer's boat before the Commodore's. And here's Ron and his wife Sam there at the Commodore's ball. Yep. Bob Ellis, Hugh Duffield, Jack Minton, Ron Beers, and Jack Banks. Of course, we've always had storms down here, right? So here's a storm that unfortunately blew over a starboat. Just some excerpts from Telltales. This was my best buddy, Tommy Vonnegut. He was a really good sailor. Unfortunately, died in an airplane crash when he was in his early 20s. Cy Gillette, Glenn Clark, here's Tommy again, Hank Inouye, Greg Gillette, Norm Baxter, and myself. Club Luau here in the Longhouse. So you'll notice the Longhouse looks a little different. Right over here was where the wall of the Longhouse used to be, so it was quite a bit smaller. And after, I'm not sure what year it was, but after 1971, we blew it out and moved the wall. 72. We moved the wall back about 15 feet there to make the Longhouse larger. State championships were the biggest thing here in Hawaii in the 60s and 70s. We had the Cal 20 fleet. We had 100 Cal 20s here in Hawaii, so there was a bunch of competitive boats. And HYRA allowed 28 boats in the state championships. Each club was allocated a number of entries into the state championships based on their membership. Kaneohe Yacht Club was allocated 6 spots in the state championship, and we had, looks like in 1971, we had about 20 plus members that wanted to sail the state championship. So we had our own elimination series just to figure out who those 6 guys were that could go to the state championships.
Yeah, so just a fun fact, Glenn Clark, I don't know if it's created, he joined the Molokai Yacht Club, and he also joined Lahaina, so he could race with them and give Kaneohe have at least one more spot.
Right, and he's pointing out the fact that you could jump clubs in case you didn't make it in through your own club. So I made it in the state championships in 1971, but in 1976, I didn't make it in for Kaneohe Yacht Club. So I went and represented University of Hawaii Yacht Club. I was the assistant coach that year, so I could do that.
Wait, we gotta bring you back!
Yeah, I did win that year. Yeah.
And Noodle, what's the article by?
Claire Lang wrote this article. Yeah.
Our first woman Commodore.
And this is the club eliminations for the state championship that year. Shot of that club eliminations. PCAT sailing on the bay. And it's not all sailing. Here's Kui and Yal Lim. Looks like they got a couple of little motorbikes. Showing them off down here at the yacht club. This is we had some really nice sea grape trees growing over where the gazebo now is, but they've been cut down. Commodore's Ball, prime rib, $5.50, 1971. And of course, Bullship. That's been going on for many, many years. Yeah. This is what the front of the club used to look like. This old sign eventually wore out, and Brett Phillips built the sign that's hanging out there now. Notice there's no fences between the yards. Everything's fenced up now. Pete Curran blasting along on a thistle. And Doris Osborne painting the buoys out there by the entrance to the club. More maintenance, somebody painting the reserve signs there by the Commodore's parking. Fashion shows. Here's Tacey Bedell, 1972 with Janet Brody. And Stars racing on the bay. The Star Fleet wasn't very big, but it was very competitive. Slips got more and more desirable and scarce here at the yacht club. So in 1972, the floating pier was extended. We couldn't afford to put piles in to moor it, so we anchored the pier, and it's still anchored to this day. That probably was a mistake. We probably should have bit the bullet and put the piles in, because with anchor maintenance, we more than paid for those piles many times over. But this was put in 1972. It lasted until 1987, when it was replaced with the floating pier that's there now. Another shot of the new pier. This is a happy hour race back in 1972. Happy hour race has been going on all this time, but you'll notice different kind of boats. Back then it was all small boats: Thistles, Lightnings, MPs, Hobie Cats, Cal 20s, and now it's much bigger boats. Opening day parade. This is Ben Carpenter. Some of you may remember Craven's Folly. They took a census of the world back in 1960, and they did it again 10 years later, and the numbers were off, and they decided that in 40 years it was going to be standing room only on planet Earth. So John Craven, who was the civilian equivalent of Admiral Rickover, he retired from the nuclear Navy, came out to here to Hawaii, went to work at University of Hawaii, and needed something to study, so he decided to create a floating city to house all the people that, since there would be no room on the planet for them. So they built a model, and then this was a pilot scale floating city, and this was anchored up close to the Marine base. For a number of years, it was up there. The grant money ran out, so everybody walked away from it, and when it started to sink, rather than create a hazard to navigation, they towed it down to the area just northwest of Coconut Island, and they sunk it on the reef there. Now it's a turtle house, or anyway, it's full of reef fish now, sitting out there. Here's another shot of that floating city. These are the flotation pontoons underwater before it was assembled.
Interesting note there, when they towed it, the boat that they were towing did not know what model speed it should be towed at. So they towed it at a model equivalent of about 60 knots, which is like...
Yeah, George said they towed it too fast. That's paraphrasing. Yeah. Here's a couple of starboats out racing. I think this is Cy, and I think that's you, Greg, isn't it?
What's the sail number?
3827.
That's my boat.
Yeah, so that's Greg Gillette and Cy Gillette racing starboats.
Ahead of them. The weather.
Thistles on the bay racing. In the early 70s, we got another new fleet, Fireballs. This is Brian Rush, Jen Schultz's grandson, and Staff Commodore Fred Bird, teenagers racing Fireballs. Cal 20s, more Fireballs. Mark Walker getting a trophy from his mother, Phyllis, in 1974. Ethel Giles her husband, Merritt Giles, used to race thistles. And Ethel would walk down the long pier, get about halfway out, and sit there and watch her husband out racing on the thistles. And someone felt sorry for Ethel and decided she needed some covering. So they built this shack out there halfway out on E Pier, and that became known as Ethel's Shack. And so Ethel could sit there and watch her husband race. That shack is still out there today. Ethel's Shack. Here's thistle racing back in 1974. This is Jeb Baker. He was a member down here. Art Silcox was a member. I'm not sure who's driving the boat, but I stuck this in because that's how we used to go race on Sunday in the bay here. No hats, no shirts, no glasses, nothing, no sunscreen. I don't know how we did it, but that's the way we did it back then.
Now we're paying for it.
Now we're paying for it. Yeah. It was fun going through the albums, and we came across this one. This is Brett Phillips, believe it or not. And 1975, this is his third time in a row winning the Waikiki Rough Water Swim that just took place a couple days ago. Hey, Brett.
Yeah, Brett.
And Judy Losey and Myra Grist with a couple of nice Ono.
Wahine fishing tournament.
Wahine Fishing Tournament, okay. Sandbar Party. Organized Sandbar Party, 75, excuse me. Yeah, BYOB. You can only do that certain weekends of the year now. Fran Vaughn and Dave Vaughn. I just mentioned Fran, probably the oldest surviving member of the yacht club. Anyway, she's moved to Florida now.
Did she transfer her membership to her husband, though?
Well, Fran was the member. It still is the member. She's a life member. I remember her coming down here.
Dave was a Commodore, too.
Oh, was he? Okay. Maybe there was a transfer of membership. I'm not sure. Shep Osborne, and I don't know who else this is. Must be a Halloween party, 1976. Hank Inouye ran for Congress in 1976. He was unsuccessful, but he sold insurance, so it probably didn't hurt his insurance business any. Sharon Starr with a nice Ono. When in the mid-70s, when all the lease to fee conversion was taking place, the yacht club was fortunate enough to get a chance to buy our property in fee, and wiser heads prevailed, and so we did. And we had an assessment to help pay for it, and it only took a couple of years to get it paid off. And then here's our 1976 mortgage burning party. So we owned the property without debt in 1976.
I've done that twice.
Rick says we did that twice. 1976, Commodore's reception, January 1st. Ken Brockman, Lois Nottage, and Doris Osborne here. We used to always play croquet on opening day here at the club. Ethel Giles looks like she's taking a trip to the mainland. Here she is with Dulcie Clark, Norma Nelson, Gunther back here behind her. Always had a Christmas tree here at the yacht club. Here's one being set up here in the longhouse. This is a shot of the state championship I mentioned earlier. 28 boats on the line being sailed this year. It alternated usually every year between Waikiki and Kaneohe, where they'd sail it. Looks like this year it was sailed in Kaneohe, and it looks like Kui Lim was the big winner this year because of this photo of him in the inset there. Kui won it a bunch of times. Boat parades started in the 70s and are continued to this day. Christmas boat parades. Fashion shows at the yacht club. I think this is Fred Berg escorting some lovely lady down the stage there at the fashion show. Tennis in the North Tennis Court. Bob Hawes, John Murdahl, who's here tonight, and Ken Brockman. I think this looks like must be John's opening day, I believe, as Commodore. Freddie Morris, he was our manager, club manager for many years. So it was Freddie Morris, then Joe O'Toole, then Robbie Nicholas, and then
Ruth Chatterton
Ruth Chatterton.
before Robbie.
Before Robbie, yep, Robbie Nicholas. Thank you, Rick. Let's see. No, I'm lost. Ken Ratka, and now Sean Myers. South Tennis Court got built amid much controversy, and when it was finally completed and opened, members were allowed to roller skate on it for a roller skating party. Here's Happy Miller out there leading the charge. Roller derby. Yeah. Opening day at the club. Here's Wilma Schrader and her husband Chuck's boat, decorated for the boat parade. Another boat parade boat. I think that was Cliff Maeda. This is the judging boat for the boat parade. Look at all those people on there. All those blue blazers. Another boat in the boat parade, Ranger 26. I'm not sure what this event is. This might be opening day, and I know this is Joe Starr and PJ Saxton. Do you guys, anyone recognize these other guys?
Bill Kramer,
Bill Kramer, yeah.
Lou, I think, and Don Horton.
Oh, is that Don Hart? Okay. I know sex change operations are a big deal these days. Joe Starr, don't do it. It doesn't suit you. So, yeah. Claire Lang, our first female Commodore, 1982. With this, I didn't know Mr. Cohen, but with Pete Curran here. Junior Yacht Club. We used to have a quite active junior yacht club. When I was a kid, we had dances all the time with live bands and light shows and the whole deal back in the late 60s and early 70s. That continued sporadically for a number of years. Here's one in the early 80s. Looks like a kid's dance here at the club with a DJ this time. John Murdahl and Matt Cochran, 1982. John Murdahl Jr. Yeah. Al Phillips, this is Brett and Aaron's father, 1982. When I was a little kid, we didn't have a junior sailing program. Kids just got in El Toros until you mastered that. Then you went and started crewing for an adult in one of those Thistles, Lightnings, Stars, or that kind of thing. And when I was about 15, so that would have been about 1969 or 70, we started a junior program, and we got Flying Juniors. Those weren't real durable, so those were replaced a few years later with these Widgeons, which proved to be a little bit better boats, and they've morphed into other classes over the years for the junior program. Aaron and Sherry Phillips. Oh yeah, Aaron retired from work yesterday. Congratulations to Aaron. And I understand Sherry is right behind him shortly. Here's little Ricky Osborne. Quick learner, yeah, with Allison Leary behind him. And Clark Fremgen, and this is your illustrious treasurer, Marcy Fleming, I believe. 1983. Yeah. ORF fleet. I think I mentioned that mostly small boats, but Ranger 26s and Ranger 33s and other small boats racing out in the bay. Junior Yacht Club in the 4th of July parade, 1983. I think the club was in the parade this year. Was the juniors in there as well? Or was it? Yeah, juniors were in there this year as well. Everybody in there this year. Char Sinclair and Jerry Sinclair. I miss those guys. Stan Jones, Judy Losey, and Dave Brown. Opening day. Chuck and Wilma Schrader. Miss those guys too. Another fashion show flyer. This would be 4th of July party, 1983. Coast Guard doing a rescue demonstration with a helicopter right here in the turning basin. I don't think they would do that anymore. Transpac Day on the Bay. The Transpac parties used to be a real big deal over here. This is more Transpac party. Yacht Club Luau, 1983. Prices are going up $15 a head here. Watson and Freddie Goldsmith. That's Gordon Goldsmith's parents. Work Party, 1985. This is the building of the kayak racks up there at the inner end of E here. Laser racks. Okay. They were laser racks and then they turned into kayak racks. I think is that Danny Sinclair right there? I think that is. I think that's Danny. Nancy Nottage, Clark Fremgen, Dave Nottage, Allison Leary. 1986. Staff Commodores, January 1st, 1986. Norm Baxter, Herb Jordan, Bobby Edmondson, Ron Beers, Rick Osborne Sr., Harry Euler, Tom Pico, Glenn Bunnell, Bobby Holland, Ken Brockman, and Jack Minton. George Losey hasn't changed a bit. And Happy Miller and her deckhands back there in 1986. Found this. I wasn't aware of this. Found this in the archives there. Apparently, we had a tsunami coming in 1986. So everybody thought it was a good idea to get a lawn chair and go watch the tsunami. But fortunately, it turned out to be a non-event. Yeah.
It was 4 inches.
4 inches. Yeah. Haul out, big boat haul out. Of course, that's went on for many years. Who knows if we'll ever get it back? But it was went on for many years out here. Mick Meyerdirks. Here's when Ho'onanea arrived from the mainland in Pacific Cup, 1988. Wayne Reese, Ryan Brown, Karen Brown, Dave Brown, Dave Kelly, and Gary Billick. Paul Schrader. I miss Paul. And I guess we were allowed to go into the bar without a shirt on back then. A lot of cruising taking place out of Kaneohe Yacht Club. This is Fred and Elin Farrell's Choi Lee 36. Lorna Doone, the Cal 46 belonging to Art Nash. Don Chapman's CSY 44 and my father Bob Leary's CSY 44, all tied to the buoy in Kealakekua Bay on the Big Island. We did a fleet cruise up to the Big Island, 1988. And here's all the cruisers having a party at Don Chapman's boat. Charlie Dolan here, Art Nash, Jimmy Nash, Fred and Elin Farrell, Bob Leary, Madge Nash. Welcoming boats into the Pacific Cup. Yeah. Here's the 1989 Lipton 1 crew. Looks like 1988 and 87 was a busy year for making babies. Aaron Phillips with Lindsay, Jamie Starr with Stephanie, Mike Thompson with Ashley and Blake, Brett Phillips with Christine. I'm there holding Kendra. Here's Dave Kelly with Kevin and I can't remember his other Kevin and Sean, and Skip Winterbottom with Jesse and Mike, I believe. Yeah. Skip Winterbottom with Tip Gilbert. I believe it's a country western party. Yeah, definitely. More country western. Rod and Fafa Moore, Don Horton, and Jamie Starr. This is Martin McMurrow this is his Newcomers Cooper Park in 1991. What a man, yeah. Wayne and Marilyn Reese. 1992, Don Chapman's CSY 44 was out there in the Long Pier, plugged into a trickle charger, and sometimes when you're plugged into shore power, this happens. And caught on fire, totaled totaled his boat, did $60,000 damage to my dad's boat here, and about the same amount of damage to the boat on the other side. This is one of the reasons I never leave my boat plugged in. This looks like a sock hop down here at the club. See Bob and Franny Haas, Fran and Dave Vaughn, Rod and Fafa Moore, Roland and Pat Clements, Peter Lois Nottage, and Harvey and Diane Minsky. A sock hop. Pacific Cup started arriving at Kaneohe Yacht Club in 1988, and it's continuing on. Here's your illustrious Commodore. This is your Commodore at Commodore's Ball 25 years ago. Lipton 1 racing on the bay here. This is Kaneohe Lipton crew on Fast Forward racing a bunch of town boats. And of course, it's important to keep the kids on the boat. This is a Thursday night race. I think this is Marcy Fleming here on Ho'onanea. There's Danica Panache. I believe this is Lacey Phillips and Kendra Leary. Got to teach him young. Here's young Kara learning how to grind a winch. The Riddle Regatta used to finish over at Coconut Island, and I think this is the fleet anchored out in front of Coconut Island. Here's Leslie Johnson getting ready to swim in to the party. New Year's Eve at the Sandbar. Used to be empty out there. Here's my dad's boat and Art Nash's boat. New Year's morning, 1999. 4th of July parties. Always fun for the kids. There's kids getting ready to do some kind of an event. Kayak races in the harbor, 4th of July. Lipton 1 crew. This is 1999. Pat Haskell, Paul Schrader, myself, Aaron, Mark Walker, and Brett. With Lipton 1, yeah. This is a Lipton 1 design, yeah. Commodore Carl Marr. Bullship. Always a fun time. And ORF fleet. This is Ho'onanea, I believe, on the Molokai return voyage. And Aaron and Randy Reed, yeah, on Ho'onanea. Yeah. The small boat racing at the club kind of faded away and was replaced by larger keel boats. And here's pretty much replaced by the IRF fleet. Here's our IRF fleet out there competing on the bay. And I'm not sure if this could be a second Sunday or IRF. I'm not sure what this is, but it's one of those two. Looks like Leslie Johnson here. I'm not sure if this is a crew race or a Wahine race, but she's used to crew for Joe Cochran, and it looks like Leslie won the prize here on this day. We have a pretty good South Pacific cruising squadron here at Kaneohe Yacht Club. Probably 6 or 8 boats now from the club have gone down to the South Pacific for extended cruises. Here's a meeting of the South Pacific squadron of the KYC cruising fleet in 2016 in Nandi, Fiji. Mark and Blossom Logan and son Kana, Clay and Gail Hutchinson, and Lori and myself down there celebrating with Mai Tais. Another raft up of the cruising fleet. This time, I think this is an Easter party in the lee of Coconut Island. Dave Brown, Ho'onanea, Gordon Goldsmith's Ta'aroa, Puanani, Mark and Blossom Logan, Bo Wheeler, Marcy Fleming, Maka'oi'oi, and Mokopea, Lori's in my boat. And of course, Thursday night racing continues on. I believe these are Doug Peebles shots, as was the opening shot of the presentation. Yeah. Yeah, Thursday night racing. Chuck Cotton's O to V. And the work parties continue. This is a work party last year to replace broken bolts on the now close to 40-year-old floating pier. Got to keep working on these things. And of course, we got to end the slideshow. Got to show Keith Letsky, our epic. You know, the club takes all kinds to have a yacht club. We've got sailors, and we've got fishermen, and tennis players, and pickleball players, and pontoon boat operators, and social members, and bar fleet members, and golf fleet members, and tennis. I mean, we got everything down here. We have our eccentric sailors as well. Keith, since 2019, Keith has been going out on 4-month-long voyages to nowhere. He sails, and this is a Cal 20, guys. This is a Cal 20 that he has turned into an ocean cruiser. He goes out for 4 months, and he'll go all the way up to within 100 miles of the coast of Alaska, all the way down to within 100 miles of the Galapagos Islands, all the way down to the Tuamotus, and then he turns around and comes back without ever stopping anywhere. So I don't even think he takes his passport with him. But Keith left 2 days ago. Lori and I watched Keith sail out once again. So Keith is now gone on another one of his 4-month or longer voyages. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. Thank you very much for joining me.
This is going to be a little adjustment.